what time that?
10 minutes.
Thank you, Ken Corley. Carmel Margaret. I would appreciate, and we would appreciate, Independence for Change, a copy of that contact. We don't have it. What was said, that's very interesting. In relation to your comments that you're with us in relation to cooperatives, I welcome that. Actually, but my problem is, Minister, I haven't seen any evidence of that, and I haven't seen any evidence of a sense of urgency in relation to that. I mean, we're talking about 121 years, is it, to bring in the 2014 Act. We're talking about 123 years to bring in the review. And we're here, I think, at 126 years, and we're looking at Victorian legislation. And as I said, and I'm repeating it, it's ironic that England have changed it, and changed it for the better, and actually facilitating, encouraging, and everything possible to help cooperatives on the ground. In relation to the bill itself, I'm the first to say that the bill is not perfect. However, I stand here with a bill that has been supported by everybody in the Dáil, I think, with your exception of Fine Gael. I'm not sure where the Labour Party stand on it. And indeed, it's interesting that when Labour were there with Fine Gael with a massive majority, that the legislation wasn't changed. That's when it should have been changed, really. Wouldn't you agree, Minister? With a massive majority, if you were seriously interested in supporting the cooperative movement. But if you've had a moment on the road to Damascus, I welcome that. I truly do. And that we're all going to work for the cooperative movement in this Dáil. You point out that events have overtaken, and I welcome that, and my colleague Deputy Collins has already pointed out that the bill in itself has forced a tiny bit of change in relation to electronic filing. That was just in December. And again, that could have been done. I mean, if we were to take the bona fides of the government, and I don't wish to be negative, and in fact, I think the new Dáil, well, I'm saying something positive about you, Minister, in the sense that you've had a moment on the road to Damascus, which is good. And this new Dáil is making changes. And so I've just talked to my colleagues here, and I'm only here in my third year. When was cooperatives discussed in the Dáil? When was legislation for cooperatives ever discussed in the Dáil in your time? As I mentioned already, when Fine Gael and Labour had an overwhelming majority, and prior to that, when was it ever discussed? I don't think it was ever. I didn't interrupt you, Minister. I didn't interrupt you. Well, I'll wait for you to come back. To my knowledge, it was never discussed. And so I was at yesterday the privilege of being the chair of the Cois na Gaeilge, and we were at a briefing, and a very good briefing for Minister Simon Coveney, and the omnibus amount of legislation that's going through the Dáil, and it's going to go through in a record time. We can't put through Achnachanga Gefukula. We can't put through minimum legislation to make it easy for cooperatives on the ground, but we can push it through all of that legislation in a number of weeks. And interestingly, in that, provision is being made for Enterprise Ireland, and the legislation is going to be changed to facilitate companies, to facilitate all sorts of companies in relation to making it easier for them, with extra money available with no limit on it, and changes in relation to research and development and money being paid up front. All of those changes can be made very quickly, and I'm sure rightly so when I get a chance to go through them in detail, but made very quickly without any problem. And yet a huge problem in relation to cooperatives, despite the overwhelming evidence on the ground in Europe and elsewhere of the importance of them, and despite the evidence actually from your own government documents which set out the importance of them. For example, in the Furfus report, Social Enterprise in Ireland, published in 2013, and the government's white paper on Ireland's transition to low carbon future, amongst other policy documents, but there's two, Minister. Back in 2015, both identified the cooperative model as being core to developing community-based enterprises in each sector. So what happened as a result of that? Not too much, Minister.
2019, Minister.
So what I'm saying in relation to this, first of all, Deputy Claire Daly's office did tremendous work on this. I want to pay tribute to them for that. all bills at this stage are far from perfect. That's why we have a process. And that's why it goes to the next stage to be discussed in detail, and why this pre-legislative scrutiny. And the resources on the side of the government are enormous. The David Goliath comes to mind as usual in comparison to the resources on the other side, although things are changing slowly there too, and we will have access to draftsmanship in the future. But at this point, this is a basic bill with a number of provisions. The electronic filing has been overtaken, and I appreciate that. The other ones in relation to reducing to 3 was a common theme when I read through the submissions. And it's in keeping with Europe, and it's in keeping with other countries as well. Now, at the very least, if the government is bona fide in relation to supporting cooperatives on the ground, then you should let this go to committee stage. Let it be teased out, give an opportunity for the various stakeholders on the ground to come in and make their presentations to the committee. Now, that would show real bona fides on the part of the government and moving this forward, given that cooperative legislation has never been discussed on the floor of the Dáil till now, the 21st century, 2019. Now, Minister, if you call that negative, I think perhaps you need to go back to the dictionary, because I think what we've done here with the support of Fianna Fáil and with the support of Sinn Féin is to table a very important piece of legislation, a bill. We try to take the least offensive way forward by only putting in minimum changes, with no implications for the government, only an opportunity for you to show that you're totally behind cooperatives. Yes, you can highlight the deficiency of the bill, absolutely. And you stood here tonight and talked about a lack of transparency and accountability. Let me place on the record that I, above anyone else, would never stand over a system that lessens accountability. Absolutely no way. I spent Thursday after Thursday on the Public Accounts Committee. Week after week, we see the effect of bad governance and lack of processes. This has nothing to do with that. Reducing from 7 to 3 is to bring it into line with other European countries, to align it with the companies that don't have the same demands upon them. In relation to the accounts, it's an enabling provision. Regulations can be made. It's an enabling provision. In relation to audited accounts, that can be put in, which is one of the major requests from the various submissions, because it's such an onerous task on small cooperatives. But Jara a Carle Quid Concha, Tá Jesh Ínta Concha don Realtas, a Coranúl don a Corcoman an Talov, go will she thief here then Glúshach Sha. Agus is Jesh Ínta a Coranúl, go will shiv Oscailcha Branu an písa rochtaíoch seo, agus na lasí a dhéanamh an céad céimile atá le teacht. So, Minister, rather than pointing a finger and asking us to try and not be negative, I don't think a single speaker tonight has been negative. I think we've pointed out the absolute advantages for co-ops on the ground, the wonderful opportunities that are there, from everything from agriculture to recycling to the new energy that we need as a matter of urgency to climate change. So, Minister, I don't think you're going to change your mind at this point, but I certainly would ask you to look at the positive aspects to this bill. It's put cooperatives on the floor of the Dáil. It's kept our changes to a very minimum, and hopefully it will put enormous pressure on the government to deliver the full piece of legislation that's needed urgently, not just a consolidating piece of legislation, but a legislation that puts in a vision for cooperatives, that it spells out what a cooperative is, that it enshrines in that legislation the 7 basic principles, and then that's followed with regulations to roll out a competitive cooperative system on the ground that balances all the aid and all the assistance that's going to Enterprise Ireland, going to the IDA, and to a lesser extent to Údarás na Gaeltachta. And there's a need for all of this. And you're doing it now for Enterprise Ireland under Brexit. Let's see it in relation to the cooperative movement, who are struggling on the ground and getting much more value for money.